August 15, 1943. Camp Shelby, Mississippi. The humid southern air hung thick as morning fog when Oberstfreiter Klaus Weber stepped off the canvas-covered transport truck and encountered something that would shatter 3 years of Nazi indoctrination in a single moment. Behind the wheel of a massive GMC supply truck sat a young woman in olive-drab fatigues, her blonde hair tucked efficiently under a regulation military cap. She reversed the 3-ton vehicle with the practiced precision of a panzer driver, then climbed down from the cab to supervise the unloading of wooden crates that would have challenged 2 strong Wehrmacht soldiers. Weber had been captured 3 months earlier during the Sicily campaign with the Hermann Göring Division, Germany's elite paratrooper unit. Like 94% of German soldiers according to Wehrmacht surveys, he had been raised on Nazi ideology that relegated women to the sacred trinity of Kinder, Kusch, Kirche, children, kitchen, church. Women were biologically designed for domestic roles, Hitler had proclaimed in Mein Kampf. They possessed neither the physical strength nor intellectual capacity for military or industrial work. The sight of this American woman commanding a military operation with casual authority contradicted fundamental Nazi teachings about natural gender roles and racial hierarchy. Das ist unmöglich, Weber whispered to Feldwebel Ernst Hoffmann, his fellow prisoner from the 15th Panzer Division. Impossible. Yet there she was, Corporal Mary Henderson, directing the entire supply operation while 2 male soldiers followed her orders without question, resentment, or apparent loss of masculine dignity. The woman consulted a clipboard, checked manifests, and coordinated the distribution of supplies with an efficiency that exceeded anything Weber had witnessed in the chronically disorganized Wehrmacht logistics system. Henderson was 22 years old, from rural Tuscaloosa County, Alabama. Before Pearl Harbor, she had taught 3rd grade at a one-room schoolhouse, earning $45 monthly. When manpower shortages hit military installations across the Deep South in early 1943, she had volunteered for the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, later redesignated as the Women's Army Corps after achieving full military status. Her current assignment involved coordinating supply deliveries to prisoner-of-war camps across Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia, managing logistics for over 15,000 German and Italian prisoners. What Weber and his bewildered comrades couldn't comprehend was that this scene was being replicated simultaneously at 511 POW camps across 45 states. American women had moved into roles that German society reserved exclusively for men, performing these duties with a competence that systematically demolished Nazi assumptions about female capabilities, intelligence, and proper social roles. The integration hadn't happened overnight. The Women's Army Corps had been established in May 1942, initially as an auxiliary unit, then granted full military status in July 1943. By August 1943, over 60,000 women served in the WSC, with thousands assigned to POW camp operations. These weren't desperate wartime expedients, but carefully planned utilization of human resources that Nazi ideology had dismissed as inherently inferior. At Camp McCain in Mississippi, German prisoners observed in growing confusion as women operated sophisticated radio equipment, maintained complex vehicle fleets, and supervised administrative operations with quiet competence. Unteroffizier Paul Schmidt, captured during the Monte Battaglia fighting in Italy, wrote in a letter that somehow passed military censors, "The American women work like our best men, but they have not become masculine. They remain women while doing men's work. This creates great confusion in our minds." The confusion deepened exponentially when prisoners realized these weren't emergency measures born of desperation, but systematic integration of women into military structure. Female guards at installations like Fort Robinson, Nebraska, and Camp Atterbury, Indiana, carried loaded weapons and maintained discipline among hardened combat veterans. They didn't resort to shouting, threats, or physical intimidation like German officers, yet prisoners obeyed their instructions without resistance or challenge. Lieutenant Sarah Morrison, a 25-year-old Ohio native who supervised work details at Fort Robinson, would recall 6 decades later. The German prisoners were extraordinarily polite, almost formally courteous. They would request permission to speak, then inquire very carefully about my authority and responsibilities. They seemed genuinely bewildered that I could issue orders to male guards, and that those orders would be followed without question. Morrison had graduated from Ohio State University in 1940 with a degree in education, worked as a high school principal for 2 years, then enlisted in the WSC when recruitment opened in her area. Her assignment to POW camp supervision came after completing officer training at Fort Des Moines, Iowa, where she had studied military law, prisoner management, and Geneva Convention requirements. The systematic nature of female military integration became apparent to prisoners through daily observation. Women weren't relegated to typing and filing as Nazi propaganda suggested about American military organization. They managed complex operations, made tactical decisions, and exercised genuine authority over male subordinates. Technical Sergeant Barbara Collins, responsible for camp communications at Shelby, operated radio equipment that connected the installation to military headquarters across the Southeast. She coordinated prisoner transfers, supply requests, and security communications with a technical proficiency that impressed even skeptical Wehrmacht radio operators among the prisoners. Female camp administrators processed thousands of documents daily: prisoner records, medical reports, family correspondence, and legal documents. These women demonstrated organizational skills and attention to detail that exceeded anything most German soldiers had encountered in their own military bureaucracy. The Wehrmacht's notorious administrative chaos stood in stark contrast to the smooth efficiency of American military operations managed partly by women. Evening brought additional revelations as prisoners observed off-duty female personnel. They drove their own automobiles, attended educational classes, participated in recreational activities, and socialized freely with male colleagues. This casual interaction between sexes violated every Nazi principle about proper gender relations and social hierarchy. Women weren't subordinate to male authority but operated as equals in a complex social system that somehow maintained military discipline while permitting unprecedented personal freedom. The most jarring discovery came when prisoners learned that American women had volunteered for military service rather than being conscripted or coerced. Unlike in Nazi Germany, where women's roles were dictated by state ideology and biological determinism, American women had chosen expanded responsibilities and embraced opportunities for service beyond traditional domestic roles. Corporal Henderson, the truck driver who had so shocked Weber on that first morning, explained to curious prisoners that she had specifically requested assignment to POW camp operations rather than accepting safer clerical positions. She wanted challenging work that utilized her organizational skills and provided opportunities for advancement. The concept of women seeking challenging rather than protected roles challenged fundamental Nazi assumptions about female psychology and motivation. As August 1943 progressed into autumn, Weber and his fellow prisoners found themselves forced to confront daily evidence that contradicted core Nazi teachings. The American women they encountered weren't weak, subordinate, or intellectually inferior. They were competent professionals performing complex tasks with skill that often exceeded their male counterparts. They maintained feminine characteristics while assuming responsibilities that Nazi ideology declared biologically impossible for women to handle. The psychological impact was profound and systematic. Prisoners who had arrived at American camps with unshakable faith in Nazi racial and gender theories found those beliefs eroding under constant exposure to contradictory evidence. American women weren't failures at men's work. They were succeeding at human work that Nazi ideology had arbitrarily restricted by gender. This ideological demolition was just beginning. The German prisoners would soon discover that female competence in military roles was merely the surface of American women's integration into previously male-dominated spheres. The industrial workforce, agricultural operations, and professional careers all revealed similar patterns of female success that would systematically dismantle every Nazi assumption about gender, race, and social organization. October 1943 brought the harvest season, and with it, prisoner work programs that would expose German POWs to the full revolutionary scope of American women's economic participation. At agricultural sites across Nebraska, Iowa, and Kansas, Wehrmacht veterans found themselves working alongside farm women who operated complex machinery with the casual expertise of master technicians. These weren't desperate substitutes for absent men or temporary wartime expedients. They were skilled operators who had been running sophisticated equipment for years before Pearl Harbor. Gefreiter Hans Müller, formerly of the 21st Panzer Division, found himself assigned to a corn processing facility outside Council Bluffs, Iowa, where he encountered Mrs. Dorothy Patterson, the 34-year-old plant supervisor. Patterson had started as a floor worker in 1936, advanced to line supervisor by 1939, and assumed overall plant management when the previous supervisor enlisted in the Navy. She coordinated the work of 127 employees, managed electrical systems that powered industrial machinery, and supervised the processing of 50,000 bushels of corn daily. She understood every machine in that plant better than our best engineers understood their equipment, Müller wrote in a letter to his sister in Bavaria that passed military censors. When the main processing line broke down, she diagnosed the electrical problem in minutes and repaired it herself. In Germany, such technical knowledge would require years of apprenticeship that women are forbidden to pursue. Patterson's competence extended beyond mechanical skills to complex industrial management. She coordinated supply deliveries, managed inventory worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, scheduled maintenance on dozens of machines, and maintained production quotas that exceeded pre-war levels despite wartime material shortages. Her decisions affected the livelihoods of over 100 families and contributed significantly to regional agricultural output. The revelation that at Camp Atterbury, Indiana, German prisoners loaded lumber alongside civilian women who drove massive logging trucks through the camp gates daily. These vehicles, requiring considerable physical strength to operate and significant skill to maneuver, were handled by women who regarded such work as routine rather than extraordinary. The trucks themselves represented American industrial capacity that dwarfed German production. Each vehicle was larger and more sophisticated than anything in Wehrmacht motor pools. Mrs. Helen Rodriguez, who drove timber trucks for Morrison Lumber Company, had learned to operate heavy equipment working for her father's construction business before the war. When lumber demand increased dramatically in 1942, she had obtained her commercial driver's license and began hauling loads weighing up to 26 tons across Indiana highways. Her driving record was superior to most male drivers, with fewer accidents, traffic violations, or mechanical problems. The psychological impact on German prisoners intensified when they learned about women's systematic entry into heavy industry. At steel mills across Pennsylvania and Ohio, women operated cranes, managed blast furnaces, and supervised production lines that produced armor plate for Sherman tanks and steel beams for Liberty ships. These weren't token positions or propaganda stunts, but essential roles in the industrial machinery that was crushing Nazi Germany through overwhelming material superiority. Stabsfeldwebel Walter Brenner, held at Camp Shelby, encountered this reality during a medical appointment that would fundamentally alter his understanding of professional competence and gender roles. The camp dentist was Dr. Margaret Foster, a 35-year-old woman who had graduated from Northwestern University Dental School in 1932, completed her residency at Chicago General Hospital, and maintained a private practice before accepting military commission in the Army Dental Corps. Dr. Foster performed oral surgery on Brenner with technical skill that exceeded anything he had experienced during his 12 years in the Wehrmacht. She used advanced techniques and equipment that were superior to German military medical care, despite prisoners theoretically receiving only basic treatment under Geneva Convention requirements. Her competence wasn't an anomaly, but reflected systematic American investment in medical education and professional training that included women. In Germany, women cannot become doctors, Brenner informed Dr. Foster during his appointment, expecting confirmation of German superiority in professional standards. She replied that American medical schools had been accepting qualified women since the 1840s, that thousands of female physicians practiced across the country, and that her own sister was completing surgical residency at Johns Hopkins Hospital. This information shattered fundamental Nazi beliefs about biological determinism and intellectual capacity. The conversation continued beyond medical treatment as Dr. Foster explained that American professional education operated on merit-based admission rather than gender restrictions. Women studied engineering at MIT, law at Harvard, chemistry at Stanford, and physics at University of Chicago. They competed academically with men and often exceeded male performance in rigorous professional programs. Brenner learned that Dr. Foster had graduated third in her dental school class of 127 students, passed state licensing examinations on her first attempt, and built a successful practice that included complex reconstructive procedures. Her professional competence hadn't developed despite being female, but reflected the same intellectual capacity and technical training available to any qualified individual regardless of gender. The revelation extended beyond individual achievement to systematic utilization of human resources. American society identified talent and developed it regardless of arbitrary biological categories that Nazi ideology used to limit participation. This approach produced larger pools of qualified professionals, more innovation, and superior economic performance across all sectors. At aircraft manufacturing plants across California and Washington, German prisoners witnessed women assembling B-24 Liberators and P-51 Mustangs with precision that exceeded German aircraft production standards. Rosie the Riveter wasn't propaganda, but documented reality. Women comprised 25% of aircraft industry workers by late 1943, performing complex assembly operations that required both technical skill and physical coordination. Mrs. Catherine Murphy, who worked at Boeing's Seattle plant, had completed 6 months of technical training before beginning aircraft assembly. She installed electrical systems, mounted engines, and performed quality control inspections on bombers that would soon attack German cities. Her work was subjected to military inspection standards that tolerated no defects or shortcuts. The aircraft she helped build were superior to German planes in range, durability, and operational capability. The technical competence of American women in complex manufacturing contradicted Nazi theories about female intellectual limitations and mechanical aptitude. Women weren't struggling to perform men's work, but excelling at human work that German ideology had arbitrarily gendered. Their success demonstrated that talent and capability weren't determined by biology, but by opportunity, training, and social support. Transportation networks revealed similar patterns of female competence. Women drove buses, operated trains, managed airports, and coordinated shipping operations across the continental United States. They maintained schedules, handled complex logistics, and managed systems that moved millions of tons of cargo monthly. The efficiency of American transportation exceeded German capabilities despite widespread female participation that Nazi ideology claimed would cause systematic breakdown. Railroad operations particularly impressed German prisoners who had experienced the chronic failures of Wehrmacht logistics. American women served as station masters, dispatchers, and maintenance supervisors on railroad networks that moved troops, supplies, and civilian goods with clockwork precision. They coordinated schedules across multiple time zones, managed rolling stock worth millions of dollars, and maintained operational standards that kept trains running on time despite wartime pressures. Mrs. Jane Sullivan, assistant station master at Chicago Union Station, managed passenger and freight operations that handled over 300 trains daily. She coordinated connections between dozens of railroad companies, managed scheduling conflicts, and ensured that military shipments received priority handling. Her decisions affected transportation networks across the Midwest and contributed to the logistical efficiency that was enabling American military success. The autumn harvest season provided final confirmation of American women's systematic integration into economic production. Across the Great Plains, women operated combines, managed grain elevators, and coordinated agricultural operations that produced food surpluses capable of feeding both America and its allies. They weren't auxiliary workers, but primary operators whose decisions affected national food security. German prisoners working in Nebraska cornfields observed women operating $15,000 John Deere combines that harvested 100 acres daily. These machines were more sophisticated than any agricultural equipment in Germany, yet women operated them with casual competence that suggested years of experience. The contrast with German agriculture, where women were restricted to hand labor and simple tools, was stark and undeniable. By November 1943, prolonged exposure to competent American women had begun systematically dismantling Nazi gender ideology among German prisoners. The evidence was overwhelming and impossible to dismiss. Women weren't failing at expanded roles, but succeeding beyond German comprehension. They maintained feminine characteristics while assuming responsibilities that Nazi theories declared biologically impossible. Winter 1943 brought expanded prisoner work programs that exposed German POWs to women exercising genuine economic authority across American industrial and agricultural sectors. The sight of competent women had been shocking. Discovering women in positions of real decision-making power proved even more devastating to Nazi ideological assumptions about natural hierarchy and biological limitations. At food processing plants across the Midwest, German prisoners encountered women who didn't simply work but actively supervised, planned production schedules, and made operational decisions that affected entire industrial complexes. The Campbell Soup facility near Toledo, Ohio, became a classroom in American organizational efficiency where traditional German assumptions about leadership and authority faced systematic demolition. Oberstfreiter Franz Weber, formerly of the 90th Light Division captured in Tunisia, found himself working under the direct supervision of Mrs. Catherine Riley, a 42-year-old production manager who had begun as a line worker in 1938 and advanced through merit-based promotion to oversee operations employing over 200 workers. Riley coordinated 3 production shifts, managed inventory worth $400,000, and maintained output schedules that supplied military commissaries across the eastern seaboard. Weber observed Riley's daily routine with growing bewilderment. She arrived at 5:30 a.m. to review overnight production reports, consulted with shift supervisors about equipment maintenance, analyzed quality control data, and made decisions about resource allocation that kept the entire operation functioning smoothly. When German prisoners suggested production improvements based on industrial methods they had observed in Wehrmacht facilities, Riley listened carefully, evaluated their proposals against American equipment capabilities and worker training, then explained why modifications wouldn't achieve desired efficiency gains. She knew every aspect of that operation better than our generals knew military tactics, Weber recalled in a 1987 interview. When we proposed streamlining based on German methods, she could immediately identify why those approaches wouldn't work with American equipment, American workers, and American production goals. She was usually correct, which was humbling for soldiers who had been taught that German industrial methods were naturally superior. Riley's authority wasn't ceremonial or limited to routine oversight. She negotiated directly with suppliers, coordinated with military procurement officers, and made capital equipment decisions that affected plant capability for years. Her technical knowledge extended from mechanical systems to chemical processes to electrical maintenance. She understood production bottlenecks, supply chain vulnerabilities, and quality control requirements with expertise that exceeded most German industrial managers. The most jarring revelation came when Weber learned about women's economic independence throughout American society. Female camp employees earned wages comparable to men in similar positions, maintained personal bank accounts, made major purchases independently, and enjoyed financial freedom that was virtually unknown among German women. Many married women worked not from economic necessity, but from personal choice, contributing to household income while maintaining separate financial identity. Feldwebel Kurt Zimmermann, assigned to clerical duties at Camp Atterbury, processed payroll records that revealed female employees often earned wages exceeding those of German officers. Technical specialists, supervisors, and professional workers commanded salaries that provided genuine economic independence. Some women earned more than their husbands, a situation that would have been scandalous in Nazi Germany, but appeared unremarkable in American society. In Germany, married women who work receive pin money for household extras, Zimmermann wrote to his wife in a letter that passed military censors. Here, women earn real wages for performing real work. Many earn more than Wehrmacht officers. They purchase automobiles, homes, and investment securities with money they have earned through their own labor. At agricultural sites across Nebraska and Kansas, prisoners encountered farm women who owned and operated sophisticated machinery, made independent planting and harvesting decisions, and negotiated directly with grain buyers and equipment dealers. These weren't wives assisting husbands, but independent economic actors who participated fully in agricultural markets and made decisions affecting thousands of acres of productive farmland. Mrs. Dorothy Hansen employed German POWs on her 640-acre farm outside Lincoln, Nebraska, where she owned 3 tractors, 2 combines, a truck fleet, and grain storage facilities worth over $75,000. Hansen had inherited the farm from her father in 1940 and expanded operations during wartime agricultural demand. She understood soil chemistry, weather patterns, seed varieties, and market conditions with expertise that exceeded most German agricultural specialists. Hansen negotiated equipment purchases, arranged crop insurance, coordinated with agricultural extension agents, and made strategic decisions about land use and crop rotation. Her farming operation produced corn and wheat yields that exceeded German agricultural productivity by substantial margins. She employed seasonal workers, managed complex logistics, and maintained financial records that satisfied both tax authorities and agricultural lending institutions. Prisoners working Hansen's fields discovered that she understood machinery maintenance, hydraulic systems, and mechanical repair with competence that rivaled Wehrmacht motor pool specialists. When equipment broke down during critical harvest periods, she diagnosed problems, ordered replacement parts, and supervised repairs that kept operations running smoothly. Her technical knowledge wasn't theoretical, but practical expertise developed through years of hands-on experience. The revelation that American farm women possessed such comprehensive knowledge and authority challenged fundamental Nazi assumptions about rural life and agricultural organization. German agricultural policy emphasized male authority and female subordination as natural and efficient. Yet American farms operated by women achieved superior productivity while maintaining family stability and community integration. Professional services provided additional evidence of women's systematic participation in American economic life. At Camp McCain in Mississippi, Oberstfreiter Johann Kruger attended educational programs where female instructors taught mathematics, English, American history, and political science. These women possessed university degrees, demonstrated intellectual capabilities that Nazi racial theory declared impossible, and exercised teaching authority over German prisoners who had been indoctrinated to believe in Aryan intellectual superiority. Miss Helen Crawford taught American government classes at 3 Mississippi camps, holding a master's degree from Vanderbilt University and speaking fluent German acquired through academic study rather than ethnic heritage. Her lectures on constitutional democracy, separation of powers, and civil liberties demonstrated sophisticated understanding of political theory that exceeded anything most prisoners had encountered in German educational institutions. Crawford explained complex constitutional principles, analyzed historical precedents, and encouraged critical thinking about governmental systems and individual rights. Her intellectual competence was undeniable, forcing prisoners to confront the reality that American women possessed educational opportunities and academic achievements that German women were systematically denied. Nazi theories about female intellectual inferiority crumbled under daily exposure to evidence of educational and professional competence. Banking and financial services revealed similar patterns of female participation in complex economic sectors. Women served as bank tellers, loan officers, bookkeepers, and financial advisors across rural America. They managed accounts, processed mortgages, and made lending decisions that affected local economic development. Their financial acumen and professional competence contradicted Nazi assumptions about women's inability to understand abstract economic concepts. Mrs. Virginia Patterson supervised German work details at a Nebraska food processing plant while maintaining her position as assistant manager of Lincoln National Bank. She coordinated prisoner labor during morning hours, then spent afternoons managing commercial loans, processing agricultural credit applications, and advising clients about investment opportunities. Her dual responsibilities demonstrated time management skills and professional competence that exceeded most German administrative officials. Patterson had graduated from University of Nebraska with a degree in economics, worked in banking since 1935, and advanced to supervisory positions through merit-based promotion. She understood interest calculations, credit analysis, monetary policy, and investment principles with expertise that enabled her to make lending decisions affecting local business development. Her professional competence wasn't exceptional, but representative of American women's participation in complex economic sectors. The systematic nature of women's economic integration became apparent through prisoner observation of entire communities. In small towns across the Midwest, women operated businesses, managed professional offices, and provided essential services that kept local economies functioning. They weren't temporary wartime substitutes, but permanent participants in economic life who had established careers and built professional reputations over many years. Legal services, medical practice, educational administration, and engineering consultation all included women who had completed professional training, obtained necessary licenses, and built successful practices. These women competed directly with men for clients and contracts, achieving success through competence rather than gender-based preferences or social connections. As 1943 ended, German prisoners faced overwhelming evidence that American society had successfully integrated women into economic roles that Nazi ideology declared biologically impossible. Women weren't struggling to perform adequately in expanded roles, but excelling beyond German comprehension while maintaining family relationships and community involvement. The psychological impact was profound and irreversible. Prisoners who had arrived with unshakable faith in Nazi gender theories found those beliefs systematically demolished through daily exposure to contradictory evidence. American women possessed capabilities, exercised authority, and achieved success that proved Nazi ideology was not merely wrong, but fundamentally divorced from observable reality. Spring 1944 brought the final phase of ideological transformation as prolonged exposure to competent American women systematically demolished the last remnants of Nazi gender ideology among German prisoners. The evidence had become overwhelming and undeniable. Women weren't failing at expanded roles or struggling to perform adequately in positions of responsibility. They were succeeding at levels that exceeded German performance standards while maintaining personal characteristics that Nazi theory claimed were incompatible with professional competence. At Camp Shelby, Oberstfreiter Johann Kruger attended advanced educational programs where female instructors taught subjects that challenged everything he had been taught about intellectual capacity and biological determinism. The camp's educational director, Dr. Margaret Walsh, held a doctorate in psychology from Columbia University and had published research on military personnel assessment that was being used to improve American officer selection procedures. Dr. Walsh conducted individual interviews with German prisoners to assess their psychological adjustment to captivity and potential for democratic re-education. Her clinical evaluations demonstrated understanding of human psychology that exceeded anything Kruger had encountered in Wehrmacht Medical Corps. She spoke fluent German, understood European political history, and possessed knowledge of Nazi ideology that enabled her to identify and address specific psychological barriers to democratic thinking. She knew our own system better than most of our officers, Kruger admitted in post-war interviews. She could explain how Nazi propaganda techniques worked, why they were effective with certain personality types, and how democratic societies protected against similar manipulation. Her intellectual sophistication was intimidating to soldiers who had been taught that German education was naturally superior. Dr. Walsh's educational programs attracted over 200 German prisoners who voluntarily attended lectures on American history, constitutional law, economic systems, and democratic governance. She encouraged critical thinking, tolerated disagreement, and fostered intellectual discussions that were impossible under Nazi educational methods. Her approach demonstrated confidence in democratic ideas that could withstand scrutiny and debate rather than requiring blind obedience and ideological conformity. The transformation was most evident in prisoner correspondence home, where censors documented increasing references to American women's capabilities expressed with admiration rather than confusion or disapproval. Unteroffizier Paul Fischer wrote to his mother, "The American women work like our best soldiers, but remain gentle and feminine. They have not become hard or masculine as our leaders said would happen. I cannot understand how they maintain both competence and womanly character, but I observe it daily." Camp social workers systematically documented conversations where prisoners struggled to reconcile their observations with Nazi teachings about gender roles and biological determinism. Clinical notes revealed cognitive dissonance as prisoners attempted to maintain ideological beliefs while acknowledging contradictory evidence they witnessed constantly. They would describe American women's professional competence with obvious admiration, then catch themselves and express confusion about how such achievements were possible, Dr. Walsh noted in her clinical reports. Their ideological training insisted that female professional success was biologically impossible, but they had observed undeniable evidence of women excelling in complex roles. The contradiction was causing systematic breakdown of Nazi gender theories. The final ideological collapse accelerated when prisoners learned that American women had chosen expanded roles rather than being forced into them by wartime necessity. Unlike in Nazi Germany, where women's activities were dictated by state ideology and biological determinism, American women had actively sought opportunities for professional advancement and economic participation. Mrs. Virginia Patterson, who supervised German work details at a Nebraska food processing plant, explained to curious prisoners that she had worked continuously since graduating from college in 1935. She had married in 1940, continued working throughout her pregnancy, and returned to her position 6 weeks after giving birth. Her mother-in-law provided childcare during work hours, and her husband actively supported her career advancement. This revelation shattered Nazi assumptions that female economic participation necessarily destroyed family life and social stability. American women managed both professional and domestic responsibilities with support from family members who took pride in their achievements rather than feeling threatened by female success. The integration appeared to strengthen rather than weaken family bonds and community relationships. Patterson's career progression illustrated systematic opportunities for female advancement in American society. She had started as a clerk, advanced to supervisor through merit-based promotion, and was being considered for plant management positions that would make her responsible for operations employing over 300 workers. Her advancement depended on demonstrated competence rather than political connections or gender preferences. Medical services provided particularly compelling evidence of women's professional capabilities. Camp medical facilities employed female physicians, surgeons, psychiatrists, and medical administrators who provided health care that exceeded German military medical standards. These women had completed rigorous medical training, passed licensing examinations, and demonstrated clinical competence that saved lives and restored health among prisoners who had expected minimal care. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, Chief Medical Officer at Camp Atterbury, had graduated from Johns Hopkins Medical School in 1938, completed surgical residency at Massachusetts General Hospital, and maintained board certification in general surgery. She performed complex operations on German prisoners, including emergency appendectomies, orthopedic procedures, and trauma surgery that exceeded care available to German soldiers in Wehrmacht medical facilities. Dr. Morrison's surgical competence was undeniable and life-saving. Prisoners who underwent her care recovered faster and more completely than would have been possible under German military medical treatment. Her clinical skills, combined with access to advanced medical equipment and pharmaceutical supplies, demonstrated American medical superiority that included rather than excluded female practitioners. The psychological impact intensified when prisoners realized that American medical schools had been accepting qualified women since the 1840s, that thousands of female physicians practiced across the country, and that women's medical education received the same rigorous training required of male doctors. American society had been developing female medical talent for over a century, while Germany systematically excluded women from medical careers. Legal services revealed similar patterns of female professional achievement. Several camps employed female attorneys who handled prisoner legal issues, correspondence with families in Germany, and coordination with international organizations monitoring prisoner treatment. These women possessed law degrees from prestigious universities, had passed state bar examinations, and demonstrated legal knowledge that exceeded most German military legal officers. Miss Dorothy Henderson, legal officer at Camp McCain, had graduated from Harvard Law School in 1939 and worked for the Judge Advocate General's office processing prisoner cases. She understood international law, Geneva Convention requirements, and military legal procedures with expertise that ensured proper treatment of German prisoners. Her legal competence protected prisoner rights while maintaining security requirements. Agricultural operations provided final confirmation of women's systematic integration into complex economic activities. Across the Great Plains, Women managed farming operations that achieved productivity levels exceeding German agricultural output despite smaller labor forces and less intensive cultivation methods. They understood scientific farming, utilized advanced machinery, and achieved crop yields that demonstrated agricultural efficiency beyond German comprehension. Mrs. Sarah Collins managed a 1,200-acre wheat and corn operation in Kansas where German prisoners worked during harvest seasons. She coordinated planting schedules, managed soil conservation programs, utilized hybrid seed varieties, and achieved yields averaging 45 bushels per acre compared to German averages of 28 bushels. Her farming methods incorporated scientific principles, mechanical efficiency, and market analysis that exceeded German agricultural education. Collins had studied agricultural science at Kansas State University, implemented soil testing programs, utilized crop rotation systems, and maintained detailed financial records that satisfied both tax authorities and agricultural lenders. Her farming operation generated annual revenues exceeding $85,000 while maintaining soil fertility and environmental conservation practices. The systematic nature of women's agricultural participation became apparent as prisoners worked on dozens of farms managed entirely or partly by women. These weren't exceptional cases, but representative examples of American agricultural development that utilized available talent regardless of gender restrictions that limited German agricultural potential. By summer 1944, German prisoners faced overwhelming evidence that American society had achieved economic and military superiority, partly through systematic utilization of female capabilities that Nazi ideology had dismissed as non-existent. Women possessed intellectual capacity, demonstrated professional competence, and exercised economic authority that proved Nazi gender theories were fundamentally incorrect about human nature and social organization. The transformation was complete and irreversible. Prisoners who had arrived as convinced believers in Nazi ideology departed as witnesses to democratic society's superior utilization of human resources. They had observed American women excelling in roles that Nazi theory declared biologically impossible, while maintaining personal characteristics that proved gender equality and feminine identity were compatible rather than contradictory. As preparations began for prisoner repatriation in 1945, many German POWs expressed hope that German women might eventually enjoy similar opportunities for education, professional development, and economic participation. They had witnessed proof that societies utilizing female talent achieved superior economic performance while maintaining social stability and family relationships. The German prisoners returned to a devastated homeland where women had been forced into industrial work by wartime necessity, but were expected to return to traditional domestic roles once Reconstruction began. The contrast with American women's permanent integration into economic life was not lost on former prisoners who had witnessed female competence, authority, and achievement. Their testimonies about American women's capabilities contributed to post-war discussions about women's roles in democratic Reconstruction. They had seen evidence that half the human race possessed talents and abilities that German society had systematically wasted through ideological restrictions based on biological mythology rather than observable reality. The shock of witnessing American women's professional competence represented more than cultural surprise. It constituted definitive proof that Nazi ideology was factually wrong about fundamental human characteristics. This revelation contributed to the broader collapse of Nazi racial and social theories that exposure to American democratic society produced among German prisoners of war. American women had achieved something that military victories alone could not accomplish. They had demonstrated through daily example that Nazi ideology was not merely evil, but factually incorrect about human nature, social organization, and economic efficiency. The German prisoners who witnessed their competence returned home carrying seeds of social transformation that would eventually contribute to democratic Reconstruction and women's advancement in post-war Germany.